И снова здравствуйте, мои уважаемые зрители.
Hello again, my dear viewers. In our yard it ends on March 13th, and already the traditional final review of the situation on the fronts. Also today I want to talk a little about the losses and the peace talks. To begin with, what we are clearing up on the fronts. South direction. There is no news on Bashtanka yet, but in Krivoy Rog in general, the situation is this. The borders of the advance of Russian troops in the region of the Kherson region and the Dnipropetrovsk region coincide with the administrative borders of these same regions. In the Dnipropetrovsk region, the armed forces of Ukraine are being strengthened, and in the Kherson region, accordingly, the Russian armed forces are being strengthened. Also comes a message that the Russian troops came close to the city of Ugledar in the morning. They took around all the settlements. Then they decided to bypass the city side and cut off its north. Why is that? Because Ugledar. It is a compact town, but it is high-rise. There are many high-rise buildings there. As I understand it, some garrison of the armed forces of Ukraine settled in the city, and it was not possible to quickly drive it out of there. Therefore, Russian troops bypassed the town from the north. And tomorrow we'll see if they go further north or surround the city and clean it up. From the city of Guliapol. So far there is no news. We think that the situation was and remains. The garrison of the armed forces of Ukraine sits in the city, which blocks the Russian armed forces. Mariupol. The cleansing of the city continues. It is difficult, but no one expected an easy sweep. Now let's move on to the Lugansk front. In the Popasnaya area, there are very intense battles going on. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Armed Forces reported that Popasnaya taken. By the way, I have already reported for the second time, but according to the data that I have, as of approximately 18 o'clock Moscow time, some gunfire could still be heard in the city. And to talk about the fact that the city is completely protected from the armed forces of Ukraine, I would not yet begin. Nevertheless, the desire of the Luhansk People's Militia is obvious. Pass through, break through the line of defense here, and go north. This is what we have seen over the past 3 days. But the line of defense of the armed forces of Ukraine has not yet been broken through here. Although in 2 places it is already pressed through. There are also reports of serious fighting in the area of the city of Severodonetsk. In the city, as the locals write, a real nightmare, and the same, but a little less, they write about the city of Rubezhny. Namely, around the city and in its suburbs there are fights. The situation in the city of Izium also cleared up. Still, a small Ukrainian garrison still remains somewhere in the southern districts of the city. It is holding there. But he's locked in there and can't get out. And those reinforcements that were going to meet him also received confirmation that they were destroyed. Nevertheless, it is also impossible to say that the Russian troops have now gone south in large columns. So far, only military intelligence is working. They are probing the situation. Yes, they reached Barbankovo. But for now, it is also impossible to say that Russian troops approached the city with large forces. There is a cleansing of territories, and so far it is impossible to talk about a serious breakthrough. Nevertheless, the success that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have achieved today is obvious. It is clear that they will try to develop it over the next few days. Kiev. There were no big clashes today either, compared to those that were yesterday. The parties have entrenched themselves on the achieved lines. There are skirmishes, but no major offensive actions were observed today. As a result, this is the situation on March 13th, on the fronts of the war in Ukraine. And here I would like to draw your attention to a few points. Moment 1. They ask me a lot of questions in a personal, Yuri, what do you think about the announced truces? The fact that the parties have already found common ground, and just about, for example, Zelensky. How did the information go? Will he sign the surrender? For example, I do not believe that Zelensky will sign the surrender. even if he signs something there. But we must remember what demands the Russian side puts forward. This denazification, disarmament of the armed forces of Ukraine. I have great doubts that the armed forces of Ukraine will obey this order. And also there are big doubts that those nationalists, who are essentially in power today, will obey this order. After all, the Russian side, as in the Minsk agreements, clearly says disarmament first, denazification, prohibition of all nationalist organizations. The requirement of the Russian language as the second state language was also voiced. And we are well aware that no one in Kiev will accept such conditions. Therefore, to say that someone will sign and execute something, but how? In my opinion, this is very, very naive. Moreover, information comes to me from the localities that in those territories that are now liberated from the Kiev authorities, no one is seriously considering this option. Even in the first approximation, Russian military-civilian administrations show everywhere that they have already come here, at least for a long time, if not forever. Although it is clear why the official Kiev is trying to peddle it. Storytelling to say that we are about to reach the goal. In fact, official Kiev is interested in performances in the rear of the Russian troops. Because as long as there is hope among these local nationalists that they can still come back, they will perform. When hope is gone, and also when activists are arrested in there, they are already starting to arrest, then all these sham protests will quickly come to naught. And it will be difficult for Kiev to show a picture that there seems to be some kind of resistance on the ground. Oh, especially funny, for example, it looked today in Skadovsk, where yesterday Russian troops entered the city without a single shot, then left without a single shot. Then about all this, about the fact that the Russian troops left, it was announced in the media that the armed forces of Ukraine drove them out of Skadovsk. A few hours later, Russian armored vehicles entered Skadovsk again, without a single shot. We went to the administration. Are you here? Guarded. And this circus throughout the rest of Ukraine is declared almost active hostilities. And so, with this moment we have clarified. Second moment. Losses to Zelensky. Literally, when yesterday or today, I don't even remember. Today, I think. Announced. Half swollen. Possibly tired. We won't go into details. The fact that the Russian armed forces have already lost up to 13,000 killed. This is nonsense, of course. There are losses and they are sensitive. I think that already more than 1,000 people have been killed, several thousand wounded. This is obvious from the intensity of the fighting. However, over the past week, losses have dropped noticeably. This is primarily due to the new tactics used by the Russian armed forces. That is, the troops have already been fired upon. They are used to fighting. Nowhere do we see such dashing cavalry charges as in the early days, where most of the losses were incurred. We see the clear work of aviation and artillery, and steady progress. But about the losses on the part of Ukraine? But there is also Zelensky Nice then. 1,300 people from the Russians. 13,000. About 1,300. What can I say? Mikhail Onufrienko. He has a lot of acquaintances, including doctors who know the situation realistically. In Kharkov hospitals. South. At the moment, approximately, in these hospitals there are more than 3,000 wounded Ukrainian servicemen. I emphasize, only in Kharkov, not counting the Kharkiv region, and taking into account those proportions that have always been given after certain strikes of Russian missiles or artillery strikes. So we can say that the number of those killed only in the Kharkov garrison reaches 1,000 people. The losses of the Kharkov garrison are very, very strong. And it was for this reason that a total mobilization began in the city. Row everyone they can to somehow fill the gap. And moreover, it is clear that the quantitative composition is clearly not compensated by the qualitative one. Because what is now gaining? It doesn't even fit the souls of what has already been knocked out. We emphasize that we are now talking about only one Kharkov. There were far from the strongest battles. And there is also the Donetsk front. There is also Mariupol. There is also Kiev. There is also Nikolaev. There is also Kherson. And everywhere the armed forces of Ukraine suffered losses. I still tend to think that at the moment the armed forces of Ukraine have lost about 8 to 10,000 killed and about 20 to 30,000 wounded. This includes also territorial defense. Yes, these are very painful losses, but not fatal yet. The most deadly for the armed forces of Ukraine will be the encirclement of the Donetsk group and its complete destruction. That's when it will really be inflicted on the troops of Ukraine, not painful, but a fatal blow. But taking into account what I am now observing at the fronts, this will not happen before a couple of weeks. This refers to the environment and at least some partial destruction of this group. This is approximately what I can say on the basis of March 13th. I continue to follow the events. There will be another review tomorrow morning, another interesting topic around the Ukrainian conflict. Everything. That's all for now. Goodbye. And see you tomorrow.
Пока все. До свидания и до завтра.